My name is Abby Jones. I'm 34 years old. My sister blocked me at the entrance to the Hargrove Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. She put one hand on the doorframe and looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered in from the street, like I was someone who had misread the address, shown up to the wrong party, gotten confused somewhere along the way. There were people behind me, couples in formal wear, a woman in a red dress who had paused mid-conversation to watch, a man in a tuxedo who had the decency to look away. 50 people, give or take. Eloise smiled, not a warm smile, the kind you give someone when you think you've already won. "You're so cheap to be here," she said. She said it slowly. She wanted it to land. It landed. Just not the way she expected. Because what Eloise didn't know, what neither she nor my mother knew, is that I had spent 18 months designing the building they were trying to keep me out of. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. I grew up in a suburb of Connecticut, about 40 minutes outside the city, middle-class neighborhood, 2-story house, a backyard that backed up against someone else's fence, the kind of neighborhood where every front yard looks almost exactly like the one next to it, which I found genuinely distressing as a child, though I didn't have the vocabulary for it then. I was the second daughter. Eloise was 4 years older, which meant she had already figured out what kind of person our mother wanted her to be before I was old enough to understand that was even a thing you could do. She was good at it too. The right friends, the right activities, the right way of walking into a room and making people feel like she had specifically come to see them. I didn't do any of that. I drew things. Not rooms exactly. I drew what happened between rooms. The hallways, the thresholds, the in-between spaces nobody bothers to decorate because nobody thinks they matter. I drew the path between the back door and the garden shed. I drew the way the light from the kitchen window hit the pavement at 4 p.m. in October. I drew imaginary spaces, courtyards that didn't exist, garden gates that belonged to houses I had never seen. My mother thought it was a phase. My father, who passed away when I was 22, used to sit next to me on the porch and watch me sketch. He never said much, just sat there, which was, honestly, the best thing anyone ever did for me. Eloise never understood why I spent Saturdays outside with a sketchbook instead of at the mall with her. She didn't ask either. We were close enough to be sisters and far enough apart to be strangers, which I think is more common than people admit. When I was 17, I started to understand that what I loved doing had a name: landscape architecture. The design of outdoor spaces. Gardens, plazas, the land between buildings. The paths people walk without thinking about who decided where they go. I read everything I could find. I applied to every program that would look at me. I got a full scholarship to Cornell, $48,000 a year. My mother's exact words when I told her were, "Cornell is very far away, Natalie." She called me Natalie. That's my middle name. She only used it when she was distracted, which told me everything I needed to know about how much of her attention the moment was getting. I went anyway, and I never quite came back. Not in the way she wanted. Cornell was 4 years of learning how to see. Not just spaces, but the logic underneath them. Why a path curves. Why a threshold matters. Why the distance between two benches determines whether strangers become neighbors or stay strangers. I graduated with honors. I moved to Boston and worked at a firm that did mostly commercial projects. Plazas, corporate campuses, the occasional university quad. Good work, careful work. Work I was proud of even when no one asked. I stayed 4 years. Then I turned 30 and started Caldwell Studio. 2 chairs, 1 monitor, a client who only called me because someone else had canceled. That first project was a city park renovation in a mid-sized town outside Providence. A $180,000 contract that took 8 months and aged me 3 years. I hired 2 people, then a third. The projects got bigger. I got better at the parts I hadn't been trained for. The client calls, the budget negotiations, the particular art of convincing someone that the thing they think they want is not the thing that will make them happy. I started my studio with $35,000 of my own money in March of 2020, which, if you remember anything about March of 2020, was either the bravest or the most catastrophically stupid thing a person could do. I still don't know which. The studio survived. Make of that what you will. The call that changed everything came 18 months later. I almost didn't answer. Before I get to that call, I need to tell you about my family. because none of what happened in December makes sense without understanding the architecture of the people involved. Eloise Jones is 38 years old. She is, by any external measure, successful, which is to say she is beautiful, socially precise, and married to a man named Preston Hargrove, whom she met at 26 and married at 27 at a ceremony that cost more than my first year at Cornell. Preston is the second son of the Hargrove family, a name that will matter later, so hold on to it. His family contributed $220,000 toward the wedding. My mother contributed what she could and spent the next 2 years mentioning the Hargroves in every conversation she had with anyone. After the wedding, Eloise became part of something. That's how my mother saw it. The Hargrove name opened doors, country clubs, charity boards, invitation-only events. Eloise moved into a 6-bedroom house in Greenwich. She appeared in the local society pages twice. She had business cards that said Community Philanthropist, which I have always found to be a beautifully unverifiable credential. My mother, Patricia, is 62, widowed. She moved into a smaller house after my father died and rebuilt her social life around Eloise's. She attended the events Eloise attended. She knew the people Eloise knew. She was, by her own description, part of the Hargrove family now, which was technically true in the way that a lot of things are technically true while being completely wrong in spirit. What my mother measured, what she had always measured, was visibility, the size of your house, the name on your husband's family crest, the number of people who recognized you at a restaurant. By those measures, Eloise had done everything right. And I had done almost nothing at all. No house, no husband, no children, just a small studio in a building that didn't have a lobby, doing work that my mother couldn't explain to her friends without trailing off halfway through the sentence. She said it to me at Christmas in 2023, the last time I sat at her table before everything changed. Abby, I'm not saying you're not smart. I'm just saying your life looks a little incomplete. I drove home afterward and repeated the word in the car. Incomplete. I thought about the scale model sitting on my desk, the project I was in the middle of, the 18 months of work I had barely begun to describe to anyone, and I almost laughed. There's something I should explain about why I never told my family what I was working on. It wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It wasn't strategy, it was something simpler and more tired than that. After a while, you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. I had tried, in the early years of the studio. I had mentioned projects, described contracts, talked about the work the way people talk about things they love. And every time, what came back was some version of the same thing. Polite indifference from Eloise. Vague concern from my mother. The specific discomfort of people who don't know how to respond to something they can't evaluate. So I stopped. 3 years without telling them about a single project. 3 years of showing up to family dinners and answering how's work with fine, busy, and changing the subject. It was a choice, a deliberate one, not out of bitterness, or not only out of bitterness, but out of something more protective than that. Some things need to exist before they can be explained. Mine did. That silence turned out to be the most powerful thing I never knew I was building. They thought they knew exactly who I was. They had no idea. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in September of 2022. I was at my desk, halfway through a site plan, eating a sandwich I had made 3 hours earlier and forgotten about. The number wasn't in my contacts. I almost let it go to voicemail. Ms. Jones? The voice was unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has never needed to fill silence. My name is Jeffrey Hargrove. I put the sandwich down. Jeffrey Hargrove was 66 years old at the time. He was the patriarch of the Hargrove family, not Preston's father, who had passed away years earlier, but the family's founding generation. He had built the original Hargrove Country Club in 1988 with his own money and his own hands, more or less. A civil engineer by training, a man who, according to every profile I later read, had an almost physical aversion to things that looked expensive without being well made. He had read a piece about my City Park project in Architectural Digest, not the main feature. A sidebar, 4 paragraphs, 1 photograph. The photograph showed the entrance path I had designed. A slight curve in the walkway, flanked by 2 rows of native grasses, leading to a central plaza. It was a small detail. I had almost cut it from the final design. Jeffrey had not cut it from his attention. Ms. Jones, he said, I don't need someone who can draw. I need someone who understands what a space is supposed to feel like. Your park piece did that. We talked for 47 minutes. He described what he wanted: a complete redesign of the club's exterior, the entrance, the gardens, the event terraces, the paths connecting the main building to the outbuildings. The club's 40th anniversary was in December of 2024. He wanted it finished by then. He wanted it to feel, as he put it, like it had always been there and also like it had never existed before. I almost asked him near the end of the call if he was related to the Hargroves in Greenwich. I'm glad I didn't. I looked it up after we hung up. I sat very still for a moment, and then I went back to my desk and started sketching. The contract was signed in November of 2022. $1.4 million for the full exterior redesign. It was the largest project Caldwell Studio had ever taken on. I didn't tell anyone, not because Jeffrey asked me to keep it quiet, though he did, in the way careful people do, because he wanted the reveal at the 40th anniversary to be clean, but because by that point the habit of not telling my family things had become as natural as breathing. Eloise's husband's grandfather had hired me to rebuild the entrance to their family club, and Eloise didn't know. I worked on it for 18 months, 3 site visits a week during the active construction phase, hours of back and forth with the stone suppliers, the horticulturalists, the lighting engineers. The entrance alone took 4 months to finalize. The angle of the path, the choice of granite, the placement of the 12 crabapple trees I insisted on running along the left side of the approach. Jeffrey pushed back on the trees once. I sent him 3 pages of reasoning. He called me the next morning and said, "Fine, the trees stay." The terrace was 3,200 square feet, stone and steel and glass, designed to hold up to 200 people under an open sky. The lighting was recessed into the walls, 6-inch fixtures, warm-toned, angled to graze the stone surface rather than flood it. The effect, when I tested it in October of 2024, was exactly what I had drawn 2 years earlier in a notebook at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. I had never set foot inside the actual clubhouse. I had only ever worked on the outside, which, looking back, feels almost too perfect. In November of 2024, Jeffrey sent me an invitation, handwritten on cream stock. The 40th anniversary celebration was set for December 14th. He wanted me there as a guest of honor. He intended to introduce me to the membership. He had, he wrote, been looking forward to this moment since the first site visit. The evening is as much yours as it is ours. Please come. I folded the note and put it in my coat pocket. I would carry it with me all the way to the front door. What Jeffrey didn't know, what I didn't know until a week before the event, was that Preston and Eloise had also been invited. Eloise was a member by marriage. Of course she was. And of course my mother was going as her guest. I found out through Donna Stratton, the club's event coordinator, who called to confirm my attendance and mentioned in passing that she had also spoken with a Mrs. Eloise Hargrove about the evening. I held the phone very still. "Is that a problem?" Donna asked. "Not at all," I said. I hung up and sat with it for a while. The question I kept returning to was not whether to go. That was never in question. I had spent 18 months on that project. I had earned the right to walk through that door. The question was whether I felt prepared for whatever Eloise and my mother might say when they saw me. And then I thought, prepared for what exactly? For being looked at like I didn't belong? That was not a new experience. I had been practicing for that my whole life. I went to my closet and decided what to wear. The night before the event, I called my closest friend, Claire Weston. Claire was the only person outside of Caldwell Studio who knew anything about the Hargrove project. I had told her fragments over the years, not the full picture, but enough that she understood the scale of it. "I need a second opinion," I said. "The coat or the blazer?" There was a pause. "The coat. You look like yourself in the coat." That was the right answer. It was a dark navy trench coat I had owned for 6 years, slightly worn at the cuffs, nothing remarkable about it. I didn't own anything remarkable. That had always been the point. I hung up and reread Jeffrey's invitation one more time. I looked at the final renders on my computer, the entrance under evening lighting, the crabapple trees bare for winter, the granite path lit from below. I had looked at those images hundreds of times. They had stopped being beautiful to me somewhere around month 12, the way any image stops being beautiful when you've stared at it long enough for it to become just a thing you have to get right. But looking at them that night, On the eve of finally seeing the real thing, I felt something I hadn't felt about my work in a long time. I couldn't sleep, not out of anxiety, out of genuine excitement, which is a rarer thing than it sounds. I thought about the entrance, about the angle of the path and the way it curved just enough to feel like a choice rather than a corridor, about the stone I had spent 6 weeks selecting, standing in a yard in Vermont in February, pressing my hand against sample after sample until I found the one that had the right weight, the right texture, the right way of going cold in winter without going dead. I didn't know my sister would be the one standing at the door. I drove to Greenwich on the evening of December 14th, 2024. It was cold, the particular cold of Connecticut in December. Dry and still, the kind that makes everything look slightly more defined than usual, like the world has been sharpened overnight. I parked in the club's lot at 7:10 in the evening, 10 minutes before I was expected. I sat in the car for a moment. Then I got out and walked toward the entrance. The lights were on. The 6-inch fixtures I had specified, recessed into the granite walls on either side of the approach, were casting exactly the warm-toned grays I had intended. The crabapple trees, bare now, as they would be in December, were lit from below, their branches making the kind of intricate shadow patterns you can't design and can't predict. You can only leave space for them. The stones looked even better than the render. I hadn't expected that. I stood still for a moment and just looked at it, not with pride exactly, something quieter than that. The particular satisfaction of a problem solved well, which is really the only reward that has ever meant anything to me. Then I saw the crowd near the entrance, and then I saw her. Eloise was standing at the door. She was wearing a floor-length black gown and a diamond necklace I recognized from her wedding photographs. Her hair was up. She had her hand resting on the doorframe in the loose, proprietary way of someone who believes they belong to a space, and the space belongs to them. Preston was beside her, talking to another couple. My mother was 2 steps behind, in a dark green dress, holding a glass of champagne she had clearly just taken from a passing tray. They looked like what they were, people who had arrived to a party at their family's club. I walked toward the entrance. Eloise saw me first. I watched her expression change. It happened in stages, the way weather changes. A small shift, then a larger one, then something that settled into something I recognized. She straightened slightly. Her chin came up. I had seen that particular arrangement of her face before. It was the face she wore when she had decided something. Abby. Her voice was not confused. It was deliberate. "What are you doing here?" She had said it loud enough. The couple Preston was talking to glanced over. A woman behind me paused. The geometry of the moment opened up the way these things do when someone speaks at that particular volume in a crowd. Not shouting, but pitched to carry. I kept walking. "You're so cheap to be here," she said. She said it with a smile. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the words, the smile. The complete, settled confidence of someone who believes they are operating from a position of total security. My mother stepped forward. "Don't put us down, Abby. This is a nice event." As though I were the problem. As though I were the one who had gotten the address wrong. I looked at my mother. I looked at Eloise. I looked at the 50 or so people who were, in various ways, now paying attention. I didn't say anything. I had learned, a long time ago, that there are moments when the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not because you have nothing to say, because what's coming is better than anything you could say. I was standing on my own work, the granite beneath my feet. I knew which quarry it had come from. I knew what it weighed per square foot. I knew the name of the man in Vermont who had cut it. I thought very clearly, I know exactly what this stone weighs. And then I heard footsteps, the kind that parted a crowd. I didn't see Jeffrey before I heard him. The crowd near the door had shifted slightly. Not dramatically, not the way a crowd parts when something goes wrong, but the quiet, instinctive rearrangement that happens when someone with a certain kind of presence moves through a room. Then he was there, 68 years old, tall, white hair, close-cropped. He wore a dark suit with no pocket square, no cufflinks I could see, nothing ornamental. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built things his whole life and had no particular need to announce it. He saw me. "Natalie," he said. He used my middle name. We had been working together for 2 years, and he had, from the very first meeting, called me Natalie. He said it suited me better, and I had never corrected him because, honestly, I found it charming. Just that one word. The way he said it, not loudly, not as a performance, was the way you greet someone you've been looking forward to seeing. Eloise's hand dropped from the doorframe. Jeffrey turned to the people nearby. He was not a man who made speeches, but he spoke clearly and with the particular authority of someone who owns the room he is standing in, not by temperament but by fact. "I want to introduce someone," he said. "This is Natalie, Abby Jones. She is the architect responsible for everything you walked through to get here tonight. The entrance, the gardens, the terraces, all of it. We have been working together for 2 years. This evening would not exist without her." He said it the way you state a fact. A few people began to look back at the entrance, back at the path they had walked up, back at the trees, the lighting, the stone. Then back at me. A woman near the front said something to the man beside her. He nodded. Jeffrey looked at me. "We've been looking forward to this." I felt something unknot in my chest that I hadn't known was knotted. I looked at Eloise. She was trying to say something. I could see it. Her mouth had opened slightly, then closed. Preston was looking at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother had gone very still. The champagne glass in her hand was held so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. Eloise's voice, when it came, was barely above a conversation. "I didn't know." 3 words. I looked at her for a moment. Then I nodded. Not in acceptance of an apology. She hadn't offered one. Just an acknowledgement. A small, quiet closing of a parenthesis. Jeffrey offered me his arm. "Shall we go in?" And I walked through the door. The inside of the Hargrove Country Club was, as it turned out, exactly what you would expect from a building whose exterior had been redesigned by someone with good taste and too much time on her hands. High ceilings, dark wood, the kind of carpeting that absorbs sound and makes everything feel slightly more serious. I had never been inside before. I had built the approach, the entrance, the gardens, and never once crossed the threshold into the main hall. It felt strange, and then it didn't. Jeffrey introduced me to people for the next 20 minutes. Board members, long-time members. The club's general manager, who shook my hand and said he'd been hearing about me for 2 years and was glad to finally put a face to the name. An older couple who had been at the club for 30 years and wanted to know specifically whether I had been responsible for the crabapple trees, because they had noticed them immediately. And then a man, 50s, navy blazer, the comfortable ease of someone who has attended these events all his life, took my hand and said, "You're the one who did the garden?" "I am," I said. "My wife cried when she saw it," he said. "Genuinely, she's been coming to this club for 15 years, and she cried." I didn't know what to say to that. I said thank you, which felt inadequate, but there isn't a better word for it. I moved through the room, I talked to people, I answered questions about the design. I ate something from a tray that I couldn't have named later, and at some point I turned around and saw Eloise standing across the room, a glass in her hand, watching me. She didn't come over. She didn't approach me at all for most of the evening. Neither did my mother. I caught Patricia's eye once, across a long table, and she looked away first. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I want to be honest about that. I had expected to feel some version of vindication, some clean, bright satisfaction. Instead, what I felt was tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and is finally allowed to put it down. My mother came to me near the end of the evening. I saw her moving through the crowd toward me, and I waited. I had no idea what she was going to say. I genuinely didn't. My mother is not a simple person. No one who has lived as long as she has, with the choices she's made, is simple. And I had long since stopped predicting her. She stopped in front of me. She looked at me for a moment. "You could have told us," she said. Not "I'm sorry," not "I didn't know." Not even a question, a statement, framed almost as an accusation, as though my silence had been a thing done to her. I looked at her. I thought about 34 years, about the scholarship she had half dismissed, about Christmas dinner in 2023, about the word incomplete, about 3 years of fine busy because no one had ever once leaned across a table and asked me what I was actually working on. "You never asked," I said. That was all. She looked at me for another moment. Then she turned and walked back into the crowd. I stood there. I thought about the stone beneath my feet. somewhere on the other side of that wall, the granite I had spent 6 weeks choosing. And then Claire appeared at my elbow. She was 20 minutes late, slightly out of breath, her coat still on. She had heard everything from Donna Stratton, who had apparently witnessed the entrance scene and had not wasted a moment getting to her phone. "I can't believe I missed it," Claire said. "You didn't miss anything," I said. "You already knew." She laughed, which was exactly what I needed. We found a corner and talked for an hour, not about Eloise, not about my mother, about the project, the real project, all the parts I had never described to anyone in their full detail, the stone selections, the lighting negotiations, the 4 months it took to finalize the entrance curve, the crabapple trees that Jeffrey had initially pushed back on. It was the first time I had talked about my work for an hour straight to someone who kept asking more questions. Nobody owed me anything that night, and somehow I got everything. The week after, nothing happened. No call from Eloise, no message from my mother. I hadn't expected one exactly. Families don't pivot that fast. They sit with things. They rearrange the furniture of their understanding slowly, in private, without announcing it. I knew that. I had grown up in that house. Jeffrey sent a short email on December 17th. The board was thrilled with the evening. They want to discuss Phase 2. Monday? I wrote back, "Let's talk Monday." That was that. I went back to work. There were other projects on my desk: a residential garden commission outside New Haven, a preliminary consultation for a university campus in Philadelphia. The studio had 3 full-time staff now and 2 part-time consultants, and a lease on an office that had an actual lobby, which still surprised me some mornings when I walked in. Life moves forward the same whether you narrate it loudly or quietly. I've always preferred quiet. 2 weeks after the event, on a Monday morning, I received a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it. I looked at it for a moment before I clicked. It was Eloise. I didn't know she still had my number. It occurred to me later that she had probably asked Preston for it, which meant she had wanted to reach out enough to ask, which meant something, though I wasn't sure what. The message was short. 4 sentences, and then a period, and then nothing. I didn't know. I should have. I don't really know what else to say. I'm sorry if I made things hard for you. I read it 3 times. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't not one either. It was something more uncertain than an apology, something closer to honesty, which I have always found rarer, and, in certain ways, more valuable. An apology can be performed. I didn't know what to do with something that felt genuinely unresolved. I put the phone down and went back to my desk. I drew for a while. Not anything specific, just lines, the way I used to draw as a kid on the porch, just to feel the movement of it. Over the next week, I wrote 3 different replies to Eloise's message. I wrote one that was warm and opened a door. I wrote one that was cool and closed it. I wrote one that tried to thread a needle between those 2 things and ended up doing neither. I deleted all 3. And then, about a week after that, I wrote the one I actually sent. 4 words. I know you didn't. I hit send and set the phone face down on my desk. I thought about what forgiveness actually is. Not the version you see performed in movies, where it arrives suddenly and completely and transforms everything. The real version, which is smaller and slower and doesn't announce itself. The version that is less a door you walk through together and more a door you simply stop standing in front of. Eloise read it and didn't reply, which honestly felt right. I'm not sure where things go from here with my sister. I'm not sure where they go with my mother. I know they are not where they were before that December evening, which is something. I know the things I felt in that room. The tiredness, the relief, the strange lightness of finally being seen by the right people for the right reasons. Those things are still with me, and I know that none of it required me to perform anything or prove anything or stand on a chair and announce myself. Jeffrey did that. I just had to show up. In January of 2025, Jeffrey and I started talking about Phase 2. The club wanted to expand the pool terrace and add an extended outdoor hospitality space. Projected contract, $860,000. We met on a Tuesday morning at the club. I walked through the entrance on my way in. I looked at the stones. I looked at the crabapple trees, still bare, still doing exactly what I had intended them to do. I thought about the first time I had driven out to that site in the winter of 2022, standing in the cold with a clipboard, trying to understand what the space wanted to become. 18 months, $1.4 million, 300 and some days of work that nobody in my family knew was happening. Jeffrey handed me a coffee and spread the preliminary plans on the table. Near the end of the meeting, he paused. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And you don't have to answer." I looked at him. "Did something happen at the entrance that evening?" Donna mentioned. "She said there was a moment before I came out." I thought about it for a second. "Nothing that matters now," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. He's a man who knows when not to ask questions. I have always appreciated that about him. There are very few people in the world who know when a subject has been closed and honor it without making you feel like you owe them an explanation for the closing. We spent another hour on the plans. I drove home in the early afternoon. The winter light was doing the thing it does in January, low and sideways, making ordinary objects cast long shadows. I passed a park on the way home. Old trees, bare branches. A path I had not designed curving through it in a way that was almost right, but not quite. I slowed down and looked at it. I made a note. People have asked me, since then, whether I regret not telling my family about the Hargrove project sooner, whether the silence was worth it, whether, if I had told them, things might have been different at that entrance. Honestly, no, I don't regret it. Some things need to exist before they can be explained. The project needed to be finished, real, standing in stone and light, before it could mean anything in the context of my family. Words alone would not have changed the way Eloise looked at me or the word my mother had chosen at Christmas dinner. What changed things was not the revelation itself. It was the fact that the revelation came from Jeffrey, unbidden, in front of 50 people, because the work had earned it. You can't manufacture that. You can only build toward it. I've thought a lot about the word Eloise used that night. Cheap. It's an interesting word. It's a word that people reach for when they can see that something lacks a certain kind of surface shine. And they mistake that absence of shine for an absence of value. When you look at someone and see a navy trench coat with worn cuffs and no jewelry, and you decide that what you're seeing is the full picture. The thing about the word cheap is that it tells you everything about the person saying it, and nothing about the person it's meant for. I have thought about what it means to build things that other people live in without knowing your name. It's the nature of the work. You design a path, and people walk it, and they feel something, and they don't know why. They just know the space is good, that it has a kind of rightness to it. And you never get credit for the feeling, only, if you're lucky, for the stones. I have built a life that way, quietly, carefully, without announcing it. Not because I was hiding, because that is simply how I work. I don't need anyone to know my name. I just need the stone to hold. That night in December, I walked through a door I had built. My sister had tried to stop me at the threshold of something that existed because of me, and I didn't have to say a word. I just had to wait for the building to speak for itself. I think about that sometimes when things feel difficult. When a project stalls or a client pushes back, or I'm sitting alone in the studio at 11 o'clock at night, second-guessing a decision I made 6 months ago. I think about the entrance at the Hargrove Country Club, about the angle of the path and the crabapple trees, and the way the light grazes the stone. I think about the fact that the building is still there, and I go back to work. If you're building something right now, something quiet, something nobody knows about yet, something that exists in scale models and late nights and decisions other people would question if they knew, keep going. The door will be there when it's time. And if someone tries to stop you at the threshold, let them. They'll find out soon enough. There is something I left out. Not deliberately, or maybe deliberately, in the way you leave certain things out when you're still not sure what they mean. About 3 weeks after the January meeting with Jeffrey, I was driving back from a site visit. A small residential project, nothing significant. A garden for a couple in Westport who wanted something that felt natural but intentional, which is one of my favorite kinds of briefs, because it sounds like a contradiction until you realize it isn't. I had the radio off. The highway was quiet in the way Connecticut highways are on weekday mornings in January, which is to say, almost entirely empty. The kind of empty that makes you feel like you're the only person who decided to be somewhere today. My phone rang through the car speakers. I looked at the screen. Eloise, not a text, a call. I had not spoken to my sister on the phone in almost 2 years. We had exchanged messages at Christmas. A few logistics around our mother's birthday. Nothing real, nothing that required a voice. I let it ring twice, then I answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one exactly, the kind of pause that happens when two people have decided to be honest with each other and are working out where to start. "I'm in Greenwich," she said. "I went to the club this morning. I walked up the entrance." I didn't say anything. "I didn't really look at it before," she said. "The night of the event, I mean. I wasn't looking at the building, I was looking at you, and I was looking at myself, which is probably the problem." I kept my eyes on the road. The exit for Westport passed on my right. "The trees," she said, "the ones along the left side of the path. I didn't know what kind they were, so I looked them up. Crabapple." "Crabapple," I said. "They're bare right now, but I could see the shape of them, the way they're spaced." She paused. I just kept thinking. You decided where every single one of those trees goes. You decided the spacing, the distance from the path, all of it. "The angle matters," I said. "If they're too close to the path, they crowd it. Too far, and they stop being part of it. You want the person walking to feel like the trees are alongside them, not watching, alongside." A silence. "I didn't know that," Eloise said. "I didn't know any of that." And there it was, not an apology. She had already offered what she had to offer in that direction, and I had accepted it as far as I was able. This was something different. This was my sister standing in front of something I had made, actually looking at it, trying to understand how it worked. I had waited 34 years for that. I didn't say that. There's no version of saying that which doesn't become a weapon, and I was tired of things that cut. "The stone," I said instead. "That took longer than anything else. 6 weeks to find the right one." 6 weeks for stone? You're looking for something specific. The color in different lights, the texture, how it behaves in cold and wet. I went to a yard in Vermont in February and stood there pressing my hand against sample after sample until I found the one that felt right. "That's insane," Eloise said, but not dismissively, with the genuine, slightly odd bewilderment of someone encountering a level of commitment they hadn't previously imagined existing. "Probably," I said. She laughed, a short, real laugh, not performed. I had not heard that laugh in a long time, and it did something unexpected to my chest. Not pain, not warmth exactly, but the particular sensation of a memory surfacing. Eloise at 16, laughing at something our father said at the dinner table. The same laugh, smaller now but the same. "I told Preston," she said. "After the event, the whole thing, I told him what I'd said to you at the door." I waited. "He was quiet for a long time," she said. "And then he said that his grandfather had been talking about the architect on this project for 2 years, that he mentioned her, you, in almost every conversation about the club, that he said she had the best spatial instincts he'd encountered in 40 years of building things." I had not known that. I did not know what to do with it, sitting in a car on a January highway, so I filed it somewhere to think about later. "Preston asked me what I said to you at the door," Eloise said. I told him. "What did he say?" Another pause. "He said, Eloise, you stood in front of the building she designed and told her she was cheap." A beat. He said it very quietly, which is worse. I thought about Preston Hargrove, whom I had met only a handful of times and had never particularly thought about one way or another. I revised that assessment slightly. "I'm not telling you this I don't want credit for it," Eloise said. "For telling you. I just thought you should know." "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. We stayed on the line for another moment. The highway was still empty. The January light was still doing its sideways thing through the windshield. "The trees will bloom in spring," I said. "The crabapples, white flowers, they only last a couple of weeks. But when they're there, the whole entrance smells different." She was quiet for a second. "I'll come back," she said, "in spring." "You should," I said. We hung up. I drove the rest of the way to Westport without the radio. I thought about my sister standing at the entrance of the Hargrove Country Club on a cold January morning, alone, looking at the crabapple trees, trying to understand the spacing, trying, in whatever halting and imperfect way she was capable of, to see what I had made. I don't know what Eloise and I are to each other now. I don't think there's a clean word for it. We are not close, and I don't know if we will become close, and I have made peace with the fact that I cannot control that any more than I can control whether it rains on a project opening day. What I know is that something shifted. Not everything, Not even most things, but something. My mother sent me a card 2 weeks after that. A store-bought card, the kind with a landscape on the front. Rolling hills, autumn light, not bad actually. And inside, in her handwriting, 3 sentences. She was proud of the work I had done. She was sorry she hadn't asked more. She hoped we could have dinner soon. 3 sentences. My mother has never been someone who says more than she means, which means those 3 sentences cost her something. I put the card on my desk. I have not answered it yet, but I haven't thrown it away. There is time, I think. There is still time, which is not something I take for granted, but which, for now, today, in this particular January that turned into February and is slowly, grudgingly becoming March, still feels true. I go to work, I design things that other people will walk through without knowing my name. And occasionally, if I'm lucky, someone will stand in front of what I made on a quiet winter morning and try to understand the spacing of the trees. That's enough. That has always been enough.